The peaceful life before the storm. The village of Oporoko was a place of calm and beauty, nestled in the heart of a lush forest, where the sound of rustling leaves and the hum of nature created a constant, peaceful backdrop. The villagers were tightly knit, bound by a shared spirituality that defined their lives. In this serene setting lived Pastor Oko, a humble yet powerful man who was adored by his community. His deep faith and ability to heal those in need made him a beacon of light to everyone in Oporoko. Whether it was through his uplifting sermons or his acts of kindness, he was a man who radiated peace and strength. Pastor Oko's life, however, was not just defined by his ministry. At his side stood his wife, Ifeoma, a woman whose beauty was rivaled only by her inner strength and grace. She was more than just the pastor's wife. She was the heartbeat of the village, known for her warmth, wisdom, and unwavering support for her husband. Together, they were a power couple, respected, admired, and the embodiment of love. They had a beautiful daughter, Yugo, who inherited her mother's kindness and her father's quiet strength. The village often spoke of the love Pastor Oku and Ifeoma shared. It was the kind of love that inspired everyone who witnessed it. They prayed together, laughed together, and served the community side by side. Their home was always filled with joy, the kind that made even strangers feel at ease. To the people of Oporoko, their marriage was a living testament to what true love and faith could bring. One morning, as the sun rose above the hills, Ifeoma received a call that would change everything. It was from her family in the distant village of Inin, a village located across a dense stretch of jungle. Her father was gravely ill, and her presence was urgently needed. The voice on the other end of the line was filled with concern and panic, urging Ifeoma to come immediately. After hearing the news, Ifeoma's heart weighed heavy with worry for her father. It was clear she had to go. She shared the news with Pastor Oku later that morning, her voice steady but laced with concern. "My father is very sick, Oku. I need to be with him. He needs me." Pastor Oku's face darkened as he looked at his wife, the pain of knowing she would be leaving clouding his thoughts. "But Ifeoma, it's dangerous to travel. The roads are rough, and the journey to Inin is long. We've already faced so much here. Can't this wait? Can't you do something from here, maybe send money or talk to him over the phone?" Ifeoma smiled softly, placing her hand over his. "Oku, some things can't be fixed by money or a phone call. My father has always been there for me, and now it's my turn to be there for him. I'll only be gone for a couple of days, and I'll return before you even miss me." But Pastor Oku wasn't convinced. He felt a deep unease settle in his chest. "I still don't like this. I can't bear the thought of you leaving me, even for a short time." Ifeoma's eyes softened, understanding the fear in her husband's heart. "I know you're worried, but God will protect me. He has always been our guide, and he will keep me safe." She kissed him on the cheek, offering a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, my love. I'll be back before you know it." Despite his reluctance, Pastor Oku knew he couldn't stop her. The two of them shared a deep trust in each other, and she had made her decision. That evening, they sat together and prayed, asking God to watch over Ifeoma as she made her journey. The night passed, but the unease that Pastor Oku felt never left him. The next morning, Ifeoma packed a small bag and prepared to leave. As she stepped out of the house, she noticed something that made her stop in her tracks, a strange sight that caused her heart to skip a beat. In front of their door, 7 dead lizards lay motionless on the ground. The sight was so unusual and unsettling that Ifeoma froze, staring at the lifeless creatures. Pastor Oku stepped out behind her, following her gaze. His heart dropped at the sight. "Ifeoma, this is not a good omen. 7 dead lizards. It's a sign. Please, my love, do not go. I beg you, let's postpone your trip." Ifeoma looked at the dead lizards and then at her husband. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes were firm. "Oku, I know you are scared. But God is with me. This is just a sign, not a warning. Please, do not let fear guide your heart." Pastor Oku's hands trembled as he reached for her. "I am not scared, Ifeoma. I am worried. I have prayed for you, but I cannot shake this feeling. Please, let me go with you." But Ifeoma was resolute. "No, my love. I must go alone. I will return quickly, and God will keep me safe. Trust in Him as you have always done." Reluctantly, Pastor Oku agreed to take her to the bus station. He helped her with her bag and watched as she boarded the bus, the unease in his heart growing stronger with each passing moment. He gave her one last look, praying silently for her safety. Then, with a heavy heart, he turned away and returned to their home. Little did he know, that would be the last time he would see his beloved wife, Ifeoma, alive. A tragic journey. The sun had barely risen on the morning Ifeoma departed for Inin, but there was a weight in the air, thick with unspoken fears. She kissed Hugo goodbye, the little girl holding on tightly to her mother's dress as if sensing something was amiss. Pastor Oku, standing silently by the doorway, watched his wife walk down the path, his heart filled with dread. The dark omen of the dead lizards still lingered in his mind. He had prayed over her, but the gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong refused to leave him. Ifeoma waved a final goodbye, offering a reassuring smile to her husband. "I'll be back soon," she called, her voice full of warmth but marked by the heaviness in her heart. Pastor Oku watched her disappear into the distance, her figure slowly swallowed up by the trees as she made her way to the bus stop. The bus ride was long and uncomfortable, the roads to Inin notoriously treacherous and winding through dense forest. As the bus rumbled along, Ifeoma gazed out of the window, lost in thought. She had been excited to see her father again, to comfort him in his time of need. Yet, as the hours passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was leaving behind something important, something that was pulling at her heart. She shook off the unease, telling herself it was just nerves. She had done this journey many times before. The distant village of Inin, surrounded by thick jungle, felt like home even though it had been some time since she last visited. But deep within her, there was an unsettling sensation that couldn't be ignored. She gripped the armrest, her knuckles white, trying to steady herself as the bus continued its journey through the wild terrain. The road ahead was dark and narrow, with no guardrails to protect the travelers from the steep cliffs that ran alongside it. Rain began to fall in sheets, making the already perilous journey even more dangerous. The bus swerved violently as the tires skidded on the slick surface, and the driver struggled to maintain control. The passengers began to murmur in fear, gripping their seats as the bus careened closer to the edge of the road. Suddenly, there was a deafening crash. The driver had lost control entirely, and in that instant, the world seemed to come to a halt. The bus hurtled off the road, tumbling down the side of the hill. The crash was catastrophic, metal twisted and crumpled as the bus rolled and came to a stop in a deep ravine. A spark from the electrical system ignited the fuel, and in moments, flames engulfed the wreckage, spreading rapidly. Inside, chaos erupted. The heat from the fire was intense, suffocating. The air was thick with smoke, and the passengers screamed in terror. But no one could escape, the flames consumed everything in their path. The crash was so violent that the bus was reduced to nothing more than a pile of twisted wreckage, a graveyard of metal and fire. Back in Oporoku, the hours passed slowly for Pastor Oku as he tried to carry on with his daily duties. But something in his spirit remained restless. The house felt empty without Ifeoma's presence, and the familiar sounds of her laughter and the rhythmic movements of her preparing meals seemed distant and foreign. It was late in the evening when the phone call came. Pastor Oku, seated at his study desk, looked up at the sound of his assistant's knock. His heart skipped a beat as his assistant entered, visibly shaken. "Pastor, there's bad news," the assistant stammered, struggling to speak. Pastor Oku felt a cold chill run through him, the uneasy feeling that had been lurking in his chest suddenly becoming an unbearable weight. "What is it, Adebayo? What happened?" Oku asked, his voice trembling slightly. Adebayo's hands shook as he struggled to find the words. It's the bus your wife was traveling in, Pastor. It crashed. The flames, the fire." His voice broke as he struggled to continue, but Pastor Oku could already feel the earth beneath his feet crumble. No, that's impossible," Pastor Oku whispered. "Ifeoma, she can't be." His voice faltered as the words twisted in his mind, unable to accept the truth. The thought of losing her, of never seeing her again, was too much to bear. Adebayo continued, his voice choked with emotion. "Pastor, they say no one survived. The wreckage, it was beyond recognition." The room seemed to spin around Pastor Oku. His world, once so full of love and joy, was now collapsing into a dark void. He stumbled back from his desk, his hands clutching his chest as the weight of the news suffocated him. His wife, the love of his life, had been taken from him in an instant. He fell to his knees, the tears flowing freely, unable to hold back the anguish that tore through him. The following days passed in a haze. Pastor Oku could barely function. He wandered through the house in a daze, his mind fixated on Ifeoma, her warmth, her laughter, her presence in every corner of their home. But now, there was only emptiness. The villagers visited, offering their condolences, but even their kind words could not reach him. He no longer had the strength to preach. His sermons, once so filled with passion and power, now fell flat. The villagers began to notice the change in their pastor. The man who had once been a beacon of hope was now a shadow of himself. He had retreated into himself, consumed by his grief. For 2 years, Pastor Oku remained in this state of sorrow. The loss of Ifeoma was too much for him to bear. He couldn't bring himself to preach, and the thought of living without her seemed impossible. His faith, once so unshakable, began to waver. How could God have allowed this? He had prayed for her safety, and yet she was gone. The pain of it all consumed him, leaving him broken and withdrawn. The quiet village of Oporoko had become a place of perpetual sadness, its once vibrant pastor now a figure lost in his sorrow. For 2 long years, Pastor Oku had lived with the unbearable weight of grief. Every day felt like an eternity as he moved through life with a hollow heart, still mourning the loss of his beloved wife, Ifeoma. Though the church continued to function, it lacked the warmth and vitality that had once radiated from Oku's presence. His once passionate sermons were now filled with emptiness, a reflection of the desolation within him. Yugo, his young daughter, felt the absence of her mother every day. She had grown accustomed to the quiet sadness that enveloped their home. She missed her mother's gentle laughter, the way she would brush her hair and sing her to sleep. But Oku, despite his best efforts, couldn't fill the gap Ifeoma had left behind. Every night, after Yugo had gone to bed, he would sit in silence, gazing at the empty space where his wife once sat, her warmth now a distant memory. The villagers, too, felt the heaviness that had descended upon Oku. They were concerned for him, especially the elders of the church, who had seen how the loss had shaken their pastor. They watched as he withdrew more and more from the world, unable to shake the deep grief that held him captive. They understood the depth of his love for Ifeoma, but they also knew that time moved on, and he could not continue to carry the burden of sorrow forever. One evening, after a particularly somber service, the elders gathered to speak with Pastor Oku. The wise elder Mama Chika, who had been a pillar in the community for many years, spoke gently but firmly. "Pastor Oku," she said, her voice full of concern, "we understand your grief. We know you miss Ifeoma, and your pain is something none of us can truly comprehend. But you must understand, my son, that you cannot live like this forever. Yugo needs you, the church needs you, and you need to heal. Oku sat quietly, his eyes downcast, as he listened to Momachika's words. His heart ached with the thought of moving on, of opening his heart to another woman. I will never love anyone the way I loved Ifeoma, he whispered, his voice breaking. How can I let go of the past? How can I let go of her? Momachika reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. Moving on does not mean forgetting. It does not mean abandoning your love for Ifeoma. But you must allow yourself to heal, for Yugo's sake and for your own. You cannot continue to carry this burden. Your heart is still full of love, Oku. Let it flow again. The other elders nodded in agreement, their faces filled with concern and compassion. Pastor Oku knew they spoke the truth, but the idea of loving someone again felt impossible. Yet, in the depths of his heart, he knew that something had to change. He couldn't stay locked in the past forever. After much internal struggle, Oku finally agreed. He would open his heart again, though the thought filled him with hesitation. The elders encouraged him to take his time, to find someone who could help him heal, someone who could bring warmth and light back into his life. It wasn't long before Oku met Edeora, a woman who would help him in ways he had never imagined. Edeora was kind, understanding, and full of compassion. She had recently moved to Oporoku, seeking a fresh start in the village after the loss of her own family. When she met Oku, she saw a man deeply broken, but she also saw the strength within him. Over time, they became close, and Adora's gentle presence began to bring warmth back into Oku's life. Her kindness and patience helped him rediscover the joy of living, and slowly, the heaviness that had weighed on his heart began to lift. Edeora never sought to replace Ifeoma. She understood that Oku's love for his late wife was irreplaceable, but she also knew that he needed someone to help him carry the weight of the future. She loved Oku for who he was, and she saw beyond the grief to the man of strength and faith that still resided within him. As their bond grew stronger, Oku began to smile again, to laugh, and to find peace in his heart. The scars of his past would always remain, but Edeora helped him to heal and to move forward. She brought life back into their home, and slowly, the once depressed pastor began to regain his strength. After several months, Oku and Edeora married in a quiet ceremony, surrounded by the villagers who had witnessed the transformation in their pastor. The joy in Oku's heart was unmistakable, though he still carried the memory of Ifeoma with him. But for the first time in years, his heart was open, and the darkness that had once consumed him had begun to recede. Edeora became a loving mother to Yugo, who quickly grew fond of her new stepmother. Though Yugo would always miss her mother, she began to understand that life had to continue, and Edeora was a kind woman who loved her father and cared for her deeply. However, not everyone in the village was pleased with the new marriage. Some still clung to the memory of Ifeoma, unable to accept that Pastor Oku had moved on. Whispers could be heard in the streets, and some people judged Oku for marrying again so soon. They felt that he had betrayed the memory of his first wife, despite the fact that Oku had never forgotten Ifeoma. But Oku didn't let the judgment of others weigh him down. He had made peace with his past and embraced the new love that had entered his life. Edeora was his future, and he had come to accept that it was time to heal and create new memories. In the warmth of Edeora's love, Oku began to rebuild his life. Together, they raised Yugo, and the family began to thrive once again. Oporoku began to see a new light in Pastor Oku, one of hope, resilience, and strength. He had learned that while love for the past was important, it was just as important to embrace the future and the possibilities that lay ahead. A mysterious woman appears. Setting, Oporoku village, several years later. It was an ordinary day in the village of Oporoku, the sun casting its warm glow over the bustling streets and the vibrant greenery that surrounded the village. The sound of children playing, farmers working, and villagers chatting filled the air as life continued its rhythm in the small, tight-knit community. Pastor Oku and Edeora had long since settled into a peaceful life, raising their daughter Yugo and continuing their work for the community. Though their hearts had healed over the years, the past, especially the memory of Ifeoma, still lingered like a shadow, quietly present but not controlling their lives. But one day, a stranger arrived in the village, Neka, a young woman who appeared out of nowhere. She was slender and quiet, with deep, dark eyes that seemed to hide secrets. Neka's arrival was like a whisper on the wind, and few knew where she had come from or what had brought her to Oporoko. The only thing that was clear was that she had no memory of her past. Neka was found on the outskirts of the village, wandering aimlessly, looking lost and confused. She had no recollection of who she was, where she had come from, or why she had ended up in Oporoko. In her hand, she carried only a small bundle of clothes, and her mind seemed a complete blank. When she was brought to the village by a concerned villager, it was clear that she had no family, no home, and no identity. The villagers, accustomed to helping those in need, were quick to take her in. Mom Koli, a kind-hearted widow who had taken care of many over the years, offered Neka a place to stay. "Come, my dear," she said gently, wrapping Neka in a warm embrace. "Rest, for you are safe now." Mom Koli treated Neka like a daughter, providing her with food, a place to sleep, and most importantly, kindness. Neka was grateful, but there was a sense of sadness in her eyes, an emptiness she couldn't explain. Despite Mom Koli's care, Neka could not shake the feeling that there was something important missing from her life, something she had forgotten. Over the next few months, Neka began to settle into her new life in Oporoko. Mom Koli, recognizing Neka's natural talent, introduced her to the art of seamstress work. Neka had a steady hand and an eye for detail, quickly becoming skilled at creating clothes for the villagers. Her work was beautiful, and soon, she became known as the village seamstress. People came from nearby villages to have their clothes made by her, and she was respected for her craftsmanship. One day, as Neka was sewing a delicate fabric, she met Edeora, Pastor Oku's wife. Edeora had been to the seamstress shop several times to commission new garments for her family. Though their first meeting was brief, a connection began to form between the two women. Neka was drawn to Edeora's kindness, while Edeora saw the quiet pain behind Neka's eyes and felt a deep sympathy for her. Neka and Edeora quickly became friends. Edeora often visited Neka's small shop, bringing food or small gifts to show her appreciation for the beautiful work she had done. During their visits, Neka would talk to Edeora, sharing her confusion about her lost memories and her longing to understand who she really was. Edeora, ever supportive and compassionate, would listen to Neka's stories, offering her comfort and encouragement, though she had no answers for the young woman. But as time passed, Neka's life in Oporoko became increasingly haunted by fragmented memories, flashes of images, sounds, and emotions she couldn't quite understand. Sometimes, as she worked on her sewing, she would be struck by a sudden wave of recognition, as if a memory was just beyond her grasp. She would see flashes of a church, a man standing at an altar, holding her hand, speaking words that made her heart race, words of love, of devotion. But each time she tried to hold on to the memory, it slipped away like water through her fingers. These flashes troubled her. They felt so real, yet so out of reach. Neka often found herself lost in thought, staring out the window, searching for answers in the village she now called home. The feeling that something significant had happened in her past weighed on her mind, but no matter how hard she tried, she could not piece together the puzzle. There were nights when she woke in a cold sweat, dreaming of a fiery accident, a bus crashing, people screaming, and a feeling of suffocation as if she had been trapped inside the flames. The dreams were vivid and terrifying, but when she awoke, they were gone, leaving only a deep sense of dread. The images and emotions lingered, but they were as fleeting as the wind. She had no idea what they meant or why they haunted her. One afternoon, after finishing a particularly long day of sewing, Neko sat by the small fire in her room, staring into the flames. She closed her eyes and allowed the images to come to her once more. This time, she saw a figure, a man, standing beside her. His voice was warm and deep, calling her name, and suddenly, a flood of memories came crashing into her mind. Ifeoma, she whispered to herself in confusion, recognizing the name but not fully understanding why it was significant. Little did Neka know, the pieces of her forgotten past were slowly aligning. The images of the church, the man, and the name Ifeoma were not random. They were memories from a life she had lost, a life that was deeply intertwined with Pastor Oku and the family he had built after Ifeoma's death. The memories of a love once lived were buried deep inside her, waiting for the right moment to resurface. But Neka, for now, remained unaware of the truth. As Neka continued to rebuild her life, working as a seamstress and forging new friendships in Oporoko, she unknowingly began a journey that would eventually lead her to the past she had lost, and to a connection with Pastor Oku and his family that would change everything. But for now, the mystery of her identity remained unsolved, a puzzle she couldn't yet piece together, but one that would soon unravel in a way that no one in Oporoko could have predicted. The village of Oporoko had embraced Neka as one of their own. Over the years, the seamstress had become a familiar face in the community, known for her craft, kindness, and quiet strength. Yet, despite the warmth she had found in Oporoko, there was still an emptiness inside her, a longing for something she couldn't quite place, a sense that her life before this moment had held greater significance than she could ever remember. One evening, after a long day of sewing, Neka sat in the small sitting room of Momankoli's house, her eyes half closed from exhaustion. The warm light from the fireplace cast a flickering glow over the room, and the soft hum of the village's evening sounds filled the air. As was often the case, Momankoli had the television on, showing one of the evening broadcasts that had been brought to Oporoko by the small satellite dish the village had managed to install. It was a rare occasion for Neka to watch television, but tonight, she found herself absent-mindedly listening as the news anchor spoke about events from the nearby towns and cities. But then, the anchor's voice faded as a new broadcast began, a religious program, featuring a familiar face. The moment the camera zoomed in on Pastor Oku, Neka's heart skipped a beat. There he was, sitting behind the pulpit, his voice strong and authoritative as he spoke to his congregation. Neka's breath caught in her throat. The voice. That voice, it was so familiar, like a memory that had been locked away in the deepest part of her mind. Her hand trembled as she reached for the remote control, turning up the volume. She leaned forward, staring at the screen, her mind spinning. "Welcome, my beloved brothers and sisters," Pastor Oku said, his words warm and comforting. "We gather here today to seek God's strength, His guidance, and His love. And know that no matter how far we may fall, we are never beyond His reach." As Oku's voice continued to fill the room, the floodgates of Neka's mind suddenly broke open. The images came rushing back, unbidden and uncontrollable. She saw herself standing beside Oku at the altar, dressed in a wedding gown, her heart filled with love. She heard his voice calling her name with affection, his eyes filled with devotion as they exchanged vows. She felt the touch of his hand in hers, strong and steady, a promise of a lifetime together. The memories continued to flood in, Ifeoma's memories. Her heart raced as she remembered her life with Oku. The way they had built a family together, the way he had held her when they had laughed, when they had prayed, when they had loved. She remembered the peaceful moments they had shared in their home, the way they had raised their daughter, Yugo, and the joy that had filled their lives. And then, the crash. The fire. The suffocating darkness that had surrounded her as the world seemed to tear apart. Neka gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she recoiled in shock. "No. No, it can't be, she whispered to herself, her heart pounding in her chest. She saw the bus, saw herself in it, trapped and helpless as the flames consumed everything. She remembered the scream, the heat, the desperate struggle to escape. She had been thrown from the wreckage, her body broken, and then, nothing. The darkness had swallowed her whole. The memories were overwhelming, crashing through her like a storm. She was Ifeoma, the woman who had died in the accident years ago. The realization hit her like a lightning bolt. She had been lost, forgotten, and brought back to life in a new form. As the memory settled, Nneka, now fully aware that she was Ifeoma, felt a deep, aching sadness rise in her chest. The life she had once lived, the family she had cherished, and the love she had shared with Pastor Oku, all of it had been ripped away from her. And now, here she was, a stranger to herself, a shadow of the woman she used to be. Shaken, Nneka stood up and turned off the television. Her mind spun with confusion, with grief, and with questions. She had to know the truth. She had to confront the reality of what had happened to her. With trembling hands, she made her way to Momankoli's room, where the older woman sat, knitting a piece of cloth by the firelight. Nneka could hardly hold back the tears that were rising within her. Momankoli, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I need to know the truth. Momankoli looked up, her eyes soft with concern. What is it, my dear? What troubles you? Nneka swallowed hard, her throat constricting. You have to tell me. Please, tell me what happened to me. Who am I? Why do I have these memories? I was on a bus, and I died, didn't I? I was gone. Momankoli's face softened, and she set down her knitting. She knew this day would come. Nneka had been asking questions for some time now, and the pieces were falling into place. Yes, Nneka, my dear, she said gently. You were brought to this village many years ago, after the accident. You were unconscious, badly injured, and we thought you would never wake. When you did, you had no memory of your past, but you were alive, and I took you in. Nneka collapsed into Momankoli's arms, overwhelmed with grief and disbelief. Ifeoma, she whispered. I am Ifeoma, aren't I? Momankoli nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. Yes, my dear. You are Ifeoma. You are the woman who once loved Pastor Oku, the mother of his child. The accident took you away from him, and from your family, but you are not gone. You came back to us, and I cared for you as best as I could, though I never knew the truth. Nneka, Ifeoma, suddenly felt like the ground beneath her was crumbling. She was her own lost self, now remembered, yet so much had changed. But Oku, he must have moved on. He must have loved someone else. Momankoli held her tightly. Yes, my dear, he did. He married again, for the sake of his daughter, and for his own healing. He loved you deeply, and he still does, in his heart. But the village has moved on, and so has he, though his heart never truly healed. The day Nneka, now Ifeoma, decided to return to Oporoko was one of mixed emotions. On one hand, she was filled with a sense of hope and determination to reclaim the family she had lost, but on the other, her heart was heavy with fear of the consequences her return would bring. For years, she had been absent, thought to be dead, and now she would have to face the truth. Her absence had left deep scars, and her reappearance would undoubtedly stir up emotions, some of them bitter. Nneka traveled through the familiar roads of Oporoko, the village that had once been her home. The landscape felt the same, yet different. She had changed, and the village had changed along with her absence. As she neared Pastor Oku's home, her steps grew slower. She had no idea how he would react, or if he would even recognize her after so many years. But she knew that she had to try. She could no longer hide from her past. Ifeoma had returned, and the life she had once shared with Oku and their daughter Yugo was waiting for her if she could find a way to fit into it again. The moment Neka stepped into the village square, whispers began to spread like wildfire. The villagers, who had heard of a strange woman living among them, now realized who she was. Ifeoma, alive, standing before them. The shock was palpable. Some gasped, others wept, and many just stared, uncertain of what to believe. The news spread quickly to Pastor Oku's home, and soon the man who had once loved her so deeply was being told that she had returned. Oku was in the middle of a quiet moment, sitting with Edeora and Yugo in their living room, when the news reached him. His heart leapt in his chest. His thoughts raced, unsure of what he had just heard. He stood up abruptly, his face pale, his breath coming in shallow gasps. Ifeoma, she's alive, he whispered to himself, disbelief caught in his voice. Edeora, who had been sitting beside him, looked at him with concern. She had heard the whispers, too. The realization that this was true hit her just as it had hit Oku, like a stone sinking deep into the pit of her stomach. Edeora looked at her husband, confusion and pain in her eyes. Oku, what does this mean? How is this possible? After all this time, her voice trailed off, her hands trembling. Oku, still in shock, could hardly form a coherent sentence. His heart had never fully healed from losing Ifeoma, and now, seeing the woman he thought he had lost forever standing in the village once again, stirred up emotions he had buried deep within. Joy, confusion, guilt, all of it welled up inside him, leaving him unable to make sense of the chaos. I don't know. I don't know what to feel, Oku muttered, his voice thick with emotion. Edeora, feeling her heart break at the thought of losing her place in Oku's heart, stood up and walked toward the window. She stared out into the village, her thoughts clouded with pain. She had given Oku all of her love and support through the years of his grief. She had been by his side, helping him raise Yugo and guiding their home through troubled waters. But now, as the reality of Ifeoma's return hit, she realized how deeply her husband had never truly let go of the past. I understand, Edeora said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I know you loved her, and I know you still do. But Oku, I love you too. I don't know how to compete with the love you had for her. I don't want to compete. I want to be with you, but I also understand that your heart belongs to her in a way that it never will to me. Oku was torn. He had never intended to hurt Edeora, but his emotions were now split in ways that he couldn't control. He loved Edeora, who had supported him when he was broken, but Ifeoma was the woman he had once promised his heart to. The feelings he had for both women were so complex, so entangled in the fabric of his life, that it was impossible to sort them out. The past and present collided, and he didn't know which way to turn. Meanwhile, Ifeoma, now Neka, had made her way to Pastor Oku's home, where the reunion would unfold. Her heart raced as she approached the front door. When she knocked, the world seemed to stand still. She knew this moment would define everything. Oku opened the door, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. He stood frozen in place, staring at the woman before him. Ifeoma, his Ifeoma, was standing right in front of him, but she was different. She was no longer the vibrant woman he had lost. She was a stranger, yet familiar. He reached out as if to touch her, to confirm she was real, but his hand faltered. Ifeoma, he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. I can't believe it. Tears welled in Ifeoma's eyes as she took a step forward, her hands trembling. It's me, Oku. It's really me. I've come back. I'm so sorry for everything. I never wanted to leave you. The moment was both joyous and heartbreaking. Oku reached out and embraced her, holding her tightly as if afraid she would slip away again. Yet, as he pulled her close, his thoughts were tangled with the reality of the life he had built with Edeora. His heart ached with the weight of the choice he now had to make. Edeora, watching from inside the house, felt her heart break in two. She could hear the words of Ifeoma and Oku outside, the sound of their reunion too painful to ignore. Tears filled Adeora's eyes, and she sat down on the edge of the bed. She had known this day would come, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of the decision her husband now had to make. The villagers were divided. Some celebrated Ifeoma's return, believing she was meant to be with Oku, while others, loyal to Edeora, believed that she had earned her place as the true wife of Pastor Oku. Whispers and debates spread like wildfire through Oporoko, and soon, Pastor Oku found himself torn between two worlds, the world of the past, and the life he had built since Ifeoma's death. The struggle was real. Oku knew that he loved both women in different ways. Edeora had been his rock, his support through the darkest times of his life. But Ifeoma was the woman he had pledged his heart to. Now, the pull of the past was stronger than ever. His heart, split between the two women, left him at a crossroads. In the coming days, Pastor Oku would have to make the most difficult decision of his life. The love he felt for both Ifeoma and Edeora weighed heavily on his heart, but the burden of responsibility for his daughter, Ugo, and the future of his family was even greater. In the end, his choice would define the course of the rest of their lives.